Okay, it is officially 12, so let's get started. One last welcome again. This is Parkside Chat on the front lines of climate resilience in California's Desert State Park. So excited for this Parkside Chat. And we know that you'll be wanting to ask some questions throughout. Please feel free to use the Q&A, the Zoom Q&A function. Just click the Q&A button and type in your questions. We will be monitoring the chat, but we will not answer the questions until the Q&A session, which will be at the end. Here is the agenda for today. It will go for about an hour. We'll start with our welcome, a little bit about Parkside Chat, and then we'll introduce our speakers. And then after our speakers present, we'll have the Q&A with the audience and then our closing remarks. I am your host. I am Shakayla Leonard. I am the member stewardship manager with California State Parks Foundation. I've been with the foundation for almost 9 years. And one of my main roles here is member stewardship, and that's through events such as this one, as well as overseeing when your donations come in and that whole process of acknowledging. So a little bit about California State Parks Foundation. We have been protecting California State Parks for nearly 60 years. That is so amazing, and I'm so glad to be a part of that journey. We were founded in 1969, and California State Parks Foundation is an independent nonprofit dedicated to the entire state park system. We are funded exclusively by membership and philanthropic gifts, not tax dollars. We have served as a steadfast voice for parks for nearly 6 decades, navigating disasters, budget crisis, and political headwinds while raising hundreds of millions of dollars to keep parks safe, accessible, and resilient. Now about Parkside Chat. It is one of our new virtual series, and the goal is to bring together park lovers, experts, and community voices. The goal is to offer insights on conservation, history, climate resilience, and park access. This is another way to stay connected to California's parks from wherever you are. And some of the formats is webinars such as this one, or even virtual tours of the actual state parks. Our most recent side chats that we have recently hosted was honoring Indigenous heritage in California state parks and 2025 monarch butterflies population count. Both recordings can be found on our YouTube page. Without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce our guest speakers for today. We have Levi Freed, who is a natural resources park aide with California State Parks. We have Luis DeVera, environmental scientist with California State Parks. And then we have Chris Hahn, who is the district senior environmental scientist in the Great Basin District with California State Parks. And before they get started, we're going to switch our slides quickly, and then we'll hand it off to Levi.
Thank you so much, Shakayla. Hi, my name is Levi Freed. Thank you guys for joining us today. So I'm going to be talking to you guys today about Arthur B. Ripley Desert Woodland State Park. And we're going to be focusing on different perspectives you can use or look through when you're approaching climate resilience. I thought when I originally started planning the presentation, I thought we were going to focus primarily on just the climate resilience aspect and how we can build a climate resilient park. But I realized as I went through this and as I've thought about my work in Arthur B. Ripley that desert ecosystems can be sometimes misunderstood or misrepresented. And people bring a lot of different ways of viewing ecosystem resilience to deserts. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about the different ways we can approach a park and how we can take all of those different perspectives and incorporate them into climate resilience while still honoring the people who are bringing all of these ideas. Is it okay if do I just say next slide? Thank you. So the first place I wanted to start, and this is going to get a little like academic and nerdy for a second, so bear with me. But I wanted to start with something called ecosystem services, and this is sort of what has centered my approach towards all climate work that I've thought about, is when people approach climate resilience, when they approach um, how they want to manage their ecosystems, they're usually doing it through the perspective of an ecosystem service. So what does this ecosystem directly or indirectly offer to the human beings who are going to interact with it? It's not very often that people want to preserve an ecosystem just for the pure sake of it existing. We usually want to benefit from it in some way, and that's okay. So, what are the different ecosystem services we want to take a look at when we're considering how and why we should preserve Arthur B. Ripley? And that's we're looking at provisioning services, which are like, can we gain any food, water, shelter, or building materials from it? Regulating services are, does Ripley help us with pollution breakdown, natural hazard protection? Is it sort of regulating itself and providing that regulation so that we're breathing clean air? Supporting systems are producing more biomass, so that's more plants growing out of the ground, which can help regulate temperature. Is it producing soil? And then we also have things like the water and carbon cycle, which are important for clean air and clean water. And then the last ecosystem service we should consider when we're looking at all of these perspectives is culturally, what does Ripley provide to us? And I think this is one of the easier ecosystem services to misunderstand because it's just like, oh, do people enjoy this ecosystem? But the history people have connected to a particular ecosystem, the ideas and perceptions they bring can really influence their time spent in a particular place. And these cultural services are often what our initial inspiration to protect a place are. When we walk into a place and we find it beautiful or comforting or peaceful, that's usually the first step in wanting to make sure that we preserve the biodiversity there. Next slide, please. Okay. So when I said we're going to get into a bunch of different perspectives about how to approach Ripley, I wanted to go back pretty far and start understanding why Ripley is the way it is. I am, like I said, a bit of a geography nerd, so we are going to do some geography, but let's see. Okay. So physical geography is important because that's going to influence our weather patterns and it's going to influence, the type of biology we have here, the type of geology that we see. So the Antelope Valley, very broadly, exists because it is at the crossroads of two mountain ranges. So we have the southern portion of the coastal range mountains, which you can see on the map provided, and that is formed. Uh, I'm sorry, I'm double checking my notes. That's formed from this. I think I have this reversed. Um, that's formed. I have it in my notes. Can I get a confirmation from Lewis or Chris? I have that as it's formed via the San Andreas Fault, but I believe that actually might be the Garlock Fault. And then the transverse mountain ranges at the bottom are formed via, I believe it's the San Andreas Fault, and there I have it reversed in my notes. But basically, um, I'll correct that at the end just to double check. But the important part here is we're dealing with a high desert environment. So we can see Ripley on the map. We have the, coast to the west of us. And what's happening is there's a rain shield being formed by those mountain ranges. It prevents the warm, moist coastal air from coming over into this area, which is why this area is the high desert. And then again, we're also at a higher elevation. Um, so it's creating a really unique ecosystem where it's arid, it's dry, but it does get cold in the winter times because it's at that higher elevation. And the plants here are going to be adapted for very um, outer edges of sort of the climate preference for like plants. So very hot summers, very cold winters, and very arid air in general. Next slide, please. So that's sort of our physical geography. Influencing Ripley on the human side, we can go back into history and we can start talking about pre-colonization. So several groups of indigenous people lived on and traveled through this area. They were acting as stewards of this land as well. The area of land that Ripley now occupies in the Western Antelope Valley was home to uh, the Tataviam, Kwaisu, Vanume tribes. As you can see on the map, there's also a lot of other tribes that probably passed through this area. While they might not have had permanent settlements, it is notable to recognize like they've all had an effect upon this environment and were in turn influenced by the environment as well. Um, Indigenous stewardship of this area looked a lot different to the way we steward the land today. And part of those traditions are coming back and basically influencing the way we want to continue to steward the land. I will talk about that a little bit more later because the descendants of these tribal people are still here and still acting as influences when we talk about how we want to manage areas like Ripley. Next slide, please. So how did Ripley become Ripley? So Ripley, Arthur B. Ripley State Park was named for Arthur B. Ripley, who was farming in the area. He did recognize a value, though, in not just completely clearing the entire western section of the Antelope Valley of the native vegetation. He did want to preserve a section of it. So, upon his passing away, he did donate this land, and it was eventually taken in and created to be a state park. Um, it's important to note that, throughout history, even post-colonization, though the land practices post-colonization were not super supportive of indigenous vegetation or native vegetation, there was some recognition that these landscapes were important to preserve biodiversity, and because they were well adapted already. Uh, Arthur B. Ripley is 560 acres, so it is a smaller park. And when it was donated to the state park system, the primary agriculture in the area were things like hay and alfalfa, primarily to provide to livestock, which has influenced the landscape of invasives that is currently being dealt with at Ripley. Next slide, please. Okay. So we're probably going to get into some things that people recognize and are interested in because we're getting into Joshua trees and juniper bushes. So what is Ripley like at the present moment? If we've considered historical perspectives, how did that leave us now? Both from a botanical perspective as well as through the lens of tourism, Ripley's most iconic features are dense areas of healthy Joshua tree and juniper bush woodland. Joshua trees are also called Yucca brevifolia and are not actually trees in that they do not form rings. So if you were to look into the center of them, you're not going to see that ring pattern that we associate with trees. They're actually hollow. The best indication of age for a Joshua tree is its height. So you would do a height measurement. And then recently, genetic data has shown that they are more closely related to other members of the agave family. And they were reclassed there after they were part of the lily family for a long time. So we are understanding and learning more about them through genetic testing. Um, and then something of interest, just in case you want to bring home Joshua tree facts, is they can grow asexually when under stress. So they'll spread through rhizomatic or root growth, and then they'll spread out their roots, and you'll see new organisms come up from the ground. So often in Joshua tree environments, you'll see a very tall or specimen at the center, and then they'll kind of cluster around, and you'll see pups at the edges. They do go to seed and bloom, and I do have some pictures. I think I had one before of what those blooms look like. We consider them very special to see every year. Um, and then they are pollinated by a particular species of moth that is the primary pollinator for when they do bloom. And those species are interdependent on each other. So the moths need the Joshua trees to live, and the Joshua trees need the moths to reproduce. The moths use the Joshua trees as their primary nesting area when they lay eggs. Okay, next slide, please. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the species we see present. So this is like more of a botanical or of a naturalist perspective. I am biased, so I will say like this is typically the perspective from which I look at the parks because it's what I enjoy. But there are other perspectives. My favorite species could not be listed. It would take too long, but I've shown a couple here just to show you sort of the diversity on offer. So we have the beaver-tailed prickly pears, which are beautiful. We have California buckwheat, which are very like iconic for Ripley. Um, Currently blooming are the narrow-leaf golden bush and then the door sage. Both of those are blooming at the parks right now. The buckwheat blooms later in the year, and then I don't believe the last time I visited I saw any of the beaver tail blooming, but it's really interesting to know that like no matter what time of year you visit, you may see something in bloom. The life cycle of Ripley isn't one season. It's not one like you have to be here these 2 weeks or you're not going to see anything of interest. You really can see something new and exciting every time you visit. Next slide, please. And then we have some of our fauna-based wildlife. I will say I do love the fauna-based wildlife at Ripley. It's just harder to capture on camera because plants don't tend to run away from you when you want to take a picture. There are tons of species at Ripley that you could look into, but these are just a few of the ones that have been captured on camera recently. I wanted to use recent photos, so these are specimens that have been caught on camera recently. Um, and we have the right-crowned sparrow, western whiptail lizard, and the white-tailed antelope squirrel. Um, there's so much to see. There's so many types of amphibians and reptiles, birds and mammals. Like there's always, like I said, something interesting to view. It just depends on the time of year you're there. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've talked a lot about why I love Ripley, but it's important to note here there is a perspective that's worth mentioning and worth acknowledging, and that's the wasteland effect. This is the idea perpetuated throughout American culture that deserts are not valuable ecosystems. This idea has been perpetuated for a long time. It's iconic and present in a lot of our imagery when we think about the people who were settling the West, settling because obviously there were people already here. Um, it is an effect of the people who colonized this land not having information on how to survive in it. So finding difficulty surviving meant they viewed the environment as inherently difficult. The wasteland effect isn't just a perception, it causes people to act in a certain way within desert environments. It causes them to view desert environments as so ecologically null that they're willing to dump their trash. Um, there is a problem in our current energy world where we do need more renewable energy, and it's important to have it, but we have to decide where that infrastructure goes. And very frequently, things like solar panels and windmills have been going into desert environments. It's difficult to say that these things shouldn't be here because ultimately the infrastructure does need to be built, but it is very common to go view the desert as not valuable enough to consider not putting these things here or spacing them out more evenly. It is additionally also made difficult by some of the best places to put these things are in the desert because of our quantity of sun and wind available. In the photos here, you can see obviously somebody has dumped. This isn't within Ripley. We are pretty good about monitoring if people are dumping around us, so it is not as common, but it does happen very frequently along the borders of Ripley. And then this picture on the right was taken from Ripley, and you can see in the distance windmills and solar fields, the blackish solar fields, and they are every year slowly encroaching closer and closer to a place like Ripley. Um, the wasteland effect is something that is affecting Ripley, even if these, actions aren't happening directly within the park. because we live in an environment that is constantly being influenced by different sources. The wind blows. You can't keep invasive plant seeds just in one area. You can't keep pollutants just in one area. So whenever these things are built near us, they do influence and affect Ripley. Next slide, please. Okay. So we've talked about sort of the positive way of viewing Ripley, which is like beautiful and biologically diverse. We've talked about the null and void way of viewing Ripley. It's important to note that both of these are affecting the current challenges affecting Ripley. So the biggest obstacle Ripley is facing in terms of being um, sort of resilient to climate change is extreme weather events and fire. The extreme weather events are tied to the fact that while overall the environment Ripley is located in, the high desert, is expected to become more dry and more hot in the summer, it's not that precipitation will gradually decrease. What's more expected is that there will be less rain in between rain events, but when a rain event does happen, it will be more extreme. It'll be a larger quantity of rain. Desert soil can be permeated by rain, but it does have to be over a period of time. A large quantity of rain in a very small amount of time will lead to inundation and flooding. Um, and the plants in an area like Ripley, because they are desert adapted, do not respond um, super well to flooding because they're not used to that. They're not used to having tons of water sitting upon them. And then the other big issue is fire. So I've mentioned invasive species a little bit. The history and legacy of agriculture in the area is that there are a bunch of um, invasive grasses, in addition to other things like invasive mustards and Russian thistle, which is tumbleweed we're all familiar with usually when we live in this area. Um, all of these plants are not native to this area, and more importantly, they're not adapted well to this area. So a lot of the plants in Ripley in the summertime, they have a dry, they're used to the dry weather and they have a waxy texture that protects them from the sunlight and prevents them from drying out completely. A lot of the invasive grasses, the mustards, and the Russian thistle, they do dry out completely in the summertime after they've bloomed, and they become really excellent sources of fuel for wildfire. Additionally, they tend to grow densely in ways that the native vegetation doesn't. So you have these giant patches of basically tinder, and it leads to really hot wildfires that the environment here, the fire cycle here, isn't super adapted to handle. And so it creates ground disruption, it creates, as you can see on the left, it devastates the Joshua trees that aren't adapted to handle fire at this scale. That picture is actually from the 2020 lake fire that did hit Ripley. Um, and so that's the biggest issue. Additionally, because Joshua trees are so iconic, they're a huge draw to the parks, and part of the reason people want to protect these parks. The climate shift is making it so that Joshua trees are having more of a difficult time surviving on the floor of the Antelope Valley. Joshua trees are adapted, like most desert vegetation, to exist sort of on the very edge of what is survivable. And so even a few degrees of increase in heat makes it difficult for them to live. So when the valley floor is warmer in the summer and it's consistently warmer every summer, they tend to die off on the valley floor, and we see them moving to refugia zones um, farther and farther in or higher and higher in elevation. Okay, next slide. Okay. So kind of a bummer. What do we do? That's how I think about this is like, what do we do? What can we do at this point? Um, and here's where I think all of the perspectives are important because you have to think about how do we get not just people who come to um, chat, Parkside chats like us, we're all probably already to some extent, at least a little bit invested in environmental issues. But there are a large portion of people who we need their help, we need their assistance, because this needs to be a big community effort to preserve parks. So how do we get people invested in wanting to take care of these parks? Um, so we start with adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. So this is stuff that we who are already kind of invested can do. Um, for those unfamiliar, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience are three different strategies you can use when approaching climate shifting in your area. Mitigation is hard because it requires preventing the effects of climate change to begin with. We are often not in charge of mitigation as individuals. Um, it is more of a statewide or countrywide thing. And at this point, if you see the news, we keep surpassing a lot of these um, dangerous points of we're, sea level rise and stuff like that. And overall global climate degrees has risen that it's hard to do mitigation. It can be done, but it's for protecting a place like Ripley that's more of a small and community based place. We're looking at a lot of adaptation, so preparing the environment for these climate shifts effects, and then resilience, which is creating systems that are going to help these places bounce back afterwards. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, we look towards land stewardship and protections. Um, one of the projects we've been working on at Ripley has been a reduction in these invasive species after they have been drying out and are sort of just waiting for something to strike a match and light them on fire. It was called a fuels reduction project, and it primarily focused on removing tumbleweed and tumble mustard. So those are those invasive mustard species, and then the Russian thistle again. And we were actually given a grant for the assistance of removing these species. Um, it's another important thing to recognize here that when it comes to aspects of climate preservation, funding is always something important that we have to think about. Um, and so, in part of our understanding different perspectives towards the desert, we do have to understand what is going to make the general public want to um, devote their resources, so time, energy, and money, towards a place like protecting Ripley. Um, Land stewardship is also important. So, it's not just getting people to want to protect Ripley, it's getting them to do practices that actually help. So, getting people to remove invasives around their plots of land is always really important because when they go to seed, those seeds don't just stay on their property, they will flow over. Motivating people not to dump so much or giving them good places to do so. Promoting the growth of Joshua trees and juniper bushes and all the other wonderful species that we've mentioned. And then invasive removal is a long-term project. It does take several cycles of removing the plants. Um, and then whatever's in the seed column will grow back and removing those plants and just doing that over a long enough period of time that eventually the invasives do start to reduce on the plot of land. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to let Lewis talk a little bit here about part of our Joshua Tree project. This portion is really focused on adaptation and resilience. So we are adapting the environment here, or adapting the Joshua trees to deal with the changing environment, but we're also helping them bounce back in case of a big climate event or a big heat event.
Thank you, Levi. For those of you who may have joined a little bit later, my name is Luis DeVera. I am the environmental scientist for the Great Basin District. I'm also a part-time lecturer for Cal State Northridge, Geography and Environmental Studies. There's some students that may have joined in, so I just wanted to welcome you all for joining in the call. But this was a project that was also awarded from CSPF back in 21, 22. And as Levi mentioned, the lake fire occurred back in 2020, and the purpose of this project was to rehabilitate that ecosystem where the impacted fire was occurring. And so, what you see here on the left in the middle images is these installations of these biodegradable cages. So we installed about 700 more or less of these biodegradable cages. We left them out for a year, and what we were trying to do is to protect those Joshua tree pups from predation from small mammals, weathering, whatever it may be. And the results were kind of like half and half. Half of them survived, half of them didn't. But what was surprising is that we found about 500 to 600 Joshua tree pups that grew sort of surrounding these cages, and so that was really fascinating. And with the power of geographic information system, also known as GIS, which is my background in geospatial sciences, we did a lot of coordinate points, and we were interested in collecting the height. We were interested in collecting the vigor of the pups. And so we're currently working with a graduate student from the department. We're looking at spatial modeling and how those geostatistical models kind of contribute to the effect of how these Joshua pups have grown, whether it may be slope, aspect, conditions of the soil. And so that graduate student is finalizing their thesis. So we're just trying to figure out what the data analysis looks like. But as an educator, it's always important to have students in the field to come out. So in the middle is one of my graduate students, Teresa Banuelos. And then we also have our Park Aide on the left. But these sort of projects is what is driven from our district. We like to incorporate the community, also universities. I think again, having my students in the field is so fundamental. And it's a way of just learning different things too, especially from a university point of view. Sometimes we need those interesting questions to really ground us from a state point of view. But yeah, so this is a project that's still reoccurring, I guess, because now that we have about 5 years worth of data, we can go back and do other amazing things because we have coordinate points. So if we ever need to revisit these data collections, we can. Um, yeah, I mean, I could talk about this project for 10, 15 minutes, but I'm not here to do that. I just wanted to showcase sort of an education side of things. Again, I have students that are in the call, and also have some of my colleagues from Cal State Northridge. So I just wanted to kind of showcase that. So I'll hand off the next slide to Levi, and she will finish the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Lewis. So we're talking about what we can do to help preserve a place like Ripley. And like I said, my assumption is a lot of the folks here, we're already invested in ecosystem preservation in general. I'm assuming a lot of us are already kind of environmentally minded. Um, so what do we do to preserve these places? Because we know it's not just the people who are already sort of environmentally minded that we need the assistance of. We need everybody in our community, even the people who may not originally understand why a desert's important. The most important thing we can do is build a strong community. So what does that mean generally, and what does that mean you should do when you go home today after this presentation? So generally, what the state parks is doing is building a good relationship with our neighbors. Um, we all occupy this land together. So on the left, I'm actually with some folks who have a property that neighbor Ripley. It's Transitions Habitat Conservancy. And they focus a lot on sustainable land stewardship, and they are conservancy, so conserving the land. Um, we have a wonderful relationship with them, and so that means that even though Ripley is 560 acres, their property and our property border each other, and we start to think about what's influencing each other. How is what state parks doing influencing them, and how are what they doing influencing state parks? And we can use the brain power contained within these groups to sort of strategize on how to manage these lands, where to remove invasives, what we should prioritize for saving, and what we don't think we will be able to save, which is a hard question, but it's easier to deal with when you have a big group of people to help you sort of manage that idea. Um, and then on the right was from a photo taken again from our fuels management project. The folks from Transitions actually did come out and help us with that project as well. So we're awesome, also really grateful to them. Um, and then we also had lots of volunteers who were just interested in the project who wanted to come help us clear invasives as well. So that was really nice that people did show up. Um, Individually, building a community that supports your desert ecosystem is really important. So if you already like desert ecosystems because, like me, you find them beautiful or you find them peaceful, um, bring a friend. Like that's the most important thing you can do. It can be really hard to want to invite less environmentally minded people into your parks because you don't want the parks to get hurt. But one of the best ways to inspire people to love the environment here is to show them what is so special and unique about it. So bring them, you know, and find the thing there that makes you fall in love with the park. For me, that's plants because I like the botanical aspect of it. But for you, it might be the solitude. It might be how I sometimes think of the word alien it looks because it's so unlike some of the environments we're used to, and that might be sort of interesting. You might like the wildlife. Something I've been interested in lately because we are setting up a greenhouse is you might be interested in how you can look at those ecosystem services. So, you might start being interested in, well, what natural food does the desert produce? Can I, cultivate this in my own backyard? Um, and learn about how that stuff is naturally growing at a place like Ripley. Like juniper berries, don't eat them. I didn't tell you to, but they are edible and they have been used as a food source for modern and indigenous people throughout history, which is really cool. Next slide, please. And then education is really important when it comes to getting people to understand these places. So I have some tips here, as I kind of mentioned in the last slide, but um, I did a project when I was also a CSUN student, and I did a project that sort of focused on how do people perceive the desert and why do they perceive it that way. Um, and part of the way I did the project or part of the project I did at CSUN was taking people into the desert and then asking them questions about how they felt, which is pretty simple stuff, right? It's like, how do you feel about where we are right now? And the answers were there's a really wide variety of answers because I had people who really love this environment just innately. They had no questions asked. Like they love it here. That's me. And then I had people who are like, I don't love it here. I don't feel great. And I asked them why. Why do you feel that way? And a lot of it was lack of exposure. They didn't spend a lot of time in desert environments. When they went on vacation, they went to coastal environments, redwoods, things like that, which is normal. But once they spent more time among the Joshua trees, among the junipers, among the flowering species in the spring, or they saw their first snake and they survived and they felt really tough and cool, that really changed their perception of Ripley and it changed their perception of desert environments in general. So, expose people to these environments is my number one tip. If you have a friend who doesn't like the desert, see if you can get them to come out and just like become desert neutral. Because that's also a good place to be if you need to preserve an ecosystem, is getting people to at least be neutral about it and not want to harm the environment by like dumping and stuff. My second tip is keep the path open. So, one of the most important things we need to do when we're thinking about how to get people to want to invest in a place like Ripley is who has access to Ripley? Who feels safe and comfortable at Ripley? For me, that's never been a question because I like the outdoors. I feel very safe in a place like Ripley, but disability access is really important. Does somebody feel like they can walk through Ripley and enjoy it? Um, Identity perspectives are really important. Do we mentioned like this place was indigenous land and it was fostered and stewarded by indigenous people, but do they feel like they have any access or control over this land now? And that would be a really important thing to consider. People who are stuck in an urban environment due to economic disadvantage. How do we get them into the desert environment and into desert ecology? How can we support, field trips for young people visiting places like Ripley? How can we support people who have never had that type of access because they maybe culturally were told that like nature is not something that they should enjoy or it's just not normal for them? Um, the more people who are exposed to Ripley, the more people who are going to start to understand it. It's never going to be for everybody, but the more people you pull in, the better chance you have of getting a coalition of people who want to donate time, money, and energy to protecting it. And then number three, as I kind of mentioned before, it's never going to be for everybody, but having grace with the people who don't immediately understand keeps them open to it in the future. you might take your friend to Ripley and it doesn't vibe with them. I have done that. I have some very um, city-centered friends who I have tried to get to understand why I love and could just spend hours walking around Ripley. And at the end of the day, they were just like, I don't think this is for me. But instead of going, oh, well, you don't care about the environment, you must not get it, blah, 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 keep that path open to them. Go, okay, maybe not this time, but maybe in the future. Maybe there will be an event at a desert environment like Ripley that will make sense for you. Um, Maybe there will be some sort of, musical event or a cultural event and it'll click. So keep that path open, keep having grace for those people because it could be something in the future that they consider more valuable. They actually start to see the ecosystem services they're deriving from it. And then next slide. So I just wanted to say thank you to all the folks who came and listened today. Um, I have the photo of the trail marker here because I would like you, if you can, this is your call to action, like I said, to bring a friend to Ripley, go hiking or walking if you can, um, and do some exploring, see what you see. When you're there, you might document um, a plant or a bird or a snake or something that it's unique and new to you. Um, and then this is also where I want to thank Shakayla and David for setting this up. I want to thank all the folks from California State Parks Foundation just for their generosity. Like I said, we were given a grant that has helped us protect Ripley, so we are really grateful. I do have names that I want to say specifically. So Sonia Hammonds, Randy Wadera, Emily Doyle, and Robert Heim. Um, And then specifically, I wanted to thank, I know I mentioned sort of them historically, but I do want to thank the indigenous tribes and do acknowledge that, this was not originally land that belonged to the folks who colonized it. It was indigenous land. So thank you to the Tohono Indian tribe, the Tule River Indian tribe, the Table Mountain Rancheria, the Northern Chumash Tribal Council, the Katanamook, and Yolnumne Tohono Indians. Thank you for allowing us to occupy parts of this land and celebrate it. And I hope we do a good job being partners in stewardship. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Levi, Lewis, and Chris. This was just so amazing. I visited Arthur B. Ripley last year and I was in awe. It truly is an amazing park. So if you have not been, I truly encourage you to go and see this park in person yourself. And so with that said, now we're going to turn it over to the audience for our Q&A. We want to hear from you. Like I said earlier, we have been monitoring the chat and we are going to do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Again, if you have not submitted your question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send in your questions. So we will go ahead and get started with the first question, which is how do the plants at Ripley compare with the plants at nearby Antelope Valley, California Poppy Reserve?
It's a good question. Ripley and the Antelope Valley California Poppy Reserve are not far from each other, but there is like a pretty decent amount of difference. So Ripley is like it's called a Woodland State Park, Arthur B. Ripley Woodland State Park. So when you're at Ripley, you are for the most part completely encompassed by the like Joshua Tree and Juniper Bush woodland part. Um, it's once you start walking into the trails, you can actually sort of get to a place where you can't really see anything around you outside of those. The AV Poppy Reserve doesn't have that woodland environment to the same extent. It's primarily more herbaceous grassland. Um, Ripley has more. I'm trying not to get too like pardon, it's not a pun, but like into the weeds about like the different species that are in different locations. But like Ripley, what I've noticed is like you primarily see the narrowleaf golden bush, Both places have the rubber rapid brush, so you will see brush at both places. The Poppy Reserve, you will see more of the like low to the ground herbaceous species, so like poppies, lupin. Um, Ripley does have herbaceous species, but what I've noticed primarily, at least blooming right now, has been the sage, the door sage, and then chia blooms at Ripley. There's some overlap, especially in like some of the shrub species and some of the herbaceous species, but I think if you went to one, you would not necessarily see anything super similar to the other. Like going to both places is worth it to me because you're going to see very different environments. Sorry if that's long-winded.
No, I think that was a great answer. And that was from my experience when I went last year. I also made sure to visit Antelope Valley. And I will say definitely two different parks, very special in their own way. So again, just get out there and see it in person. So thank you. Next question we have is protecting the Joshua tree pups from small mammal predation a result of small mammal population exponential growth, or is that amount of predation usual and we're deciding it's needed to intervene to support the ecosystem?
I'll go ahead and answer that, Levi. First of all, that's a very sophisticated question. So let me digest this for a little bit. But there wasn't really anything documented at where the burn fire occurred at the time. So there was no like documentations of any like small mammal activity, wildlife activity at all. That portion where it got burned, it's very untouched. Actually, that's an area that is not visited a lot throughout visitors. Usually, everyone goes to the main entrance, which is the north side. But the purpose of the installation of the young Joshua tree pups at that time was because they were emerging from the fire, and we wanted to make sure that we had a method to protect them during that time. Now you're talking about small mammal in terms of population exponential growth. So I wish I had the time to talk more about that specific project because we actually did identify about 600 observations of small mammal occurrences, whether they're occupying burrows or looking at scat. And we mapped it throughout the entire area. That's sort of the GIS mapping component. But you have to remember too, when you have soil that's been germinated by fire, going through the fire cycle, that it's also going to create nutrients for small mammals and also just surrounding plants. And so that's what we noticed as well. It's been for almost 5 years now after the fact. So every time I visit the burn scar, I mean, there's such a luscious vegetation of new plants that are being grown. In fact, there's actually, I find out that there's more wildlife activity as well. Just because that soil has been so conditioned, it's been it's just been, we had a lot of rain, so there's a lot of groundwater in the soil as well. So now it's more vibrant. I wish we can take visitors to the burnside, but access is just so hard to get. But it's sort of beautiful in a way. You get to see sort of a how do I like this, like a landscape that was burnt that you see from the photos, and then 6 years later, it's regenerating. Things are blooming. You can hear the bees buzzing. The birds are starting to come back. So whatever's happening over there is going through like a majestic phase, and I'm so happy to be part of that experience and doing more research and community involvement, engaging with our local conservancies, working with CSPF. So hopefully that answers that question. I know I might be kind of like dividing, but that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. That was very helpful. It was a great question and a great answer. So the next question gets into like the location of the park. What is the nearest community? I'm a little unclear on its actual location. So can we talk a little bit about where Arthur B. Ripley is?
Yeah. So the nearest like larger city, um, it's Lancaster or Palmdale, California. There are some smaller communities around it. So if you drive north from Ripley, you would end up in like Gorman or Lebec. But if you drive south, you'll end up in Lancaster. I'm trying to think, accessible by the 5 freeway or the 14 the other way. So if you're in Los Angeles, it's LA time, right? So if there's no traffic, it's about an hour away from LA.
Thank you. And speaking of accessibility, the follow-up question was, do I need a special vehicle?
No. So for Ripley, you actually just park along the side of the road, and then you walk into the park. There's no fee. So it is just something you can visit for the day. And it's very accessible in that regard. The trails are just like gravel trails, dirt trails. So there isn't um a paved area yet, but there are like transportable restrooms, and is it called a ramada? There's like an area you can sit under with shade. Yeah.
Thank you. Are you planting Joshua seedlings at this time?
Not at this time at Ripley, I believe. At least I am not. I don't know if Chris is up to anything, but I for sure am not. Like
Current,
I mentioned,
go ahead.
oh, he's chatting.
No, I'm sorry. Currently, we're not planting any Joshua trees at the park.
Thank you.
I mentioned we are constructing a greenhouse, and my area of interest is um like presenting to the public the idea of like edible vegetation and how people here could plan their diet around the desert plants. Um, but I also know that a lot of useful resources can be devoted towards like understanding Joshua tree germination and genetic diversity and stuff like that.
Thank you. And so the next question is, do you know if there are any events this year in Arthur B. Ripley for California State Parks Week in June?
Not as far as I know. I'm getting head shakes from Chris and Lewis, so they would know if it wasn't me. Yeah. Um, Unfortunately, I guess there isn't, but that doesn't mean you still can't go, you know?
Yes,
Get your
I
friends, get your
agree.
family. Yeah.
Yes. And it sounds like California State Parks Foundation may have to do another event there as well. That's another way to get some of our members and donors out there. So, yeah, more to come. So, the next question, and I'm just looking at time, we'll have probably a couple more questions. So, I believe there is a special, sorry, I'm not saying this word correctly, mesquite circle tree somewhere in the Mojave. Info, please.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Chris unmuted himself, so I'm gonna let him take
Yeah.
over.
So I've heard of mesquite circles in the Mojave area. I believe they are kind of further up towards our Red Rock Canyon State Park area rather than this far west. So that is someplace you could probably check out north of California City. In the Red Rock Randsburg area. So that might be something you can look up in that area. But I've heard of them in that general direction.
Thank you. Now, this question, since we have 2 minutes left, I wanted to end on this because I would love if you all can respond. If not, no pressure. But if funding and capacity were unlimited, what would be your top priority to strengthen climate resilience in desert ecosystems?
I would spend a lot of money on getting a lot of people to help me pull invasives without introducing weed killer. Like just physical manual pulling. It's not fun work, but it is satisfying work.
Um, I'm gonna answer this question too, and this is coming from just from my, as an instructor from CSUN. If I had funding, I'd probably provide it for students who are interested in like DNA sampling of the Joshua trees, whatever its soil as well too. And just think of ways of how it's correlated to the existing climate. You can do carbon dating, you can do, yeah, all those really extreme lab equipment sort of analysis. Um, I mean, I love drones. So maybe if you get a expensive drone that can do some type of multispectral or LiDAR, I don't know. I just like fancy equipment. So if that could be something in the future, but also like what Levi said, just maybe we can pay our volunteers. So that's something to join, to something to think of. But yeah, that's sort of my answers.
Yeah, I kind of go along with the education of individuals in the area. Come out, take a look at what the Antelope Valley offers. It is sad that in our background and in our view shed that we now have windmills and solar panels, and that wasteland effect. So it's just very, very unfortunate that we do have to see that there are better methods out there for these solar powered areas, and the windmills are just basically an eyesore. So that's one way, as Levi said, bring a friend, take a look at it. The desert's not for everybody, but there is an immense beauty out in the deserts.
Thank you. And I know I said that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, oh, go ahead. If I had to just like say one last thing on that idea as well, it's like I don't know if people have heard this phrase, but I've heard it a lot recently where it's like sometimes you have to plant the seeds for trees you're never going to see bloom. Ripley is you sometimes have to protect a park you don't know if it's going to be there in 100 years. Um, the a lot of the data I've been looking at, it's like we're surpassing all of our like climate mitigation points where it's like we could have pulled back and saved a lot more. And so it's made me realize, by 2100, I was reading the Jeremy Oders from CSUN, and he's a big Joshua Tree person. Like the Joshua trees might not be there in 100 years. By 2100, I probably won't be alive. Maybe most of this people in the call won't be, but you know, that doesn't make me want to stop trying to take care of it. So it's maybe getting people on that sort of mindset is what I would do, as well as like radical hope for this place.
Thank you, Levi. You actually answered my one last follow-up, which really was just what is like the one thing you would hope everyone take away from this webinar, and just like any hopes, like your hopes for the future of Desert State Parks. Again, you all do not have to answer, but if there's just like one thing you would like us all to take away from today.
Kind of feel like I already did, so go ahead, Liz and Chris. Sorry.
I just go out there, whether you enjoy a state park, whether you enjoy a national park, a local park, like I don't know, county park, just go out there, enjoy nature.
Yes, definitely get out there and enjoy nature. You go out to Arthur B. Ripley right now, and the Joshua trees are starting their bloom. So that is just a beautiful sight to see. Go just a little bit further down, and the poppies are starting in the Antelope Valley. So there's lots to see out there, and lots to view, and lots to enjoy.
Well, again, thank you so much, Levi, Lewis, and Chris. This was amazing. And I see we have a birthday in the chat. So happy birthday. Thank you for joining us for your birthday. Now, if you want to know how to get involved, please visit our website at calparks.org. Sign up for our email newsletter, volunteer in the state park, donate or become a member, sign a petition, and of course, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And with that said, again, thank you so much. This is recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording shortly. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye.